and the barber gave him a really good haircut, and the man paid the barber a lot of money, and they all lived happily ever. Oh, hi! How you doing? I was just writing a story about a barber. Gave people very good haircuts. What are we going to look at today? We are going to look at active voice versus passive. This is page 49 in the textbook. Everything you ever wanted to know about writing but were afraid to ask. It's available on Amazon. Okay, so generally speaking, active sentences will connect you to your reader much more directly than passive. So what do we mean when we say active versus passive? Well, we're going to take a look at that. But basically, an active sentence puts all the information that we need to know at the start of the sentence, so it's delivered directly to the reader as soon as possible. A passive style sort of inverts a sentence. So let's take a look at what we mean when we talk about active versus passive. So what do we mean when we talk about active versus passive? Well, here's a passive sentence. The ball was kicked by the boy. Active, the boy kicked the ball. Now don't overthink this stuff, it's really pretty simple. Here's another passive example. Doing the dishes was enjoyed by Alfred most out of all his chores. Now this sentence is okay, it's a bit clunky, but you can read it and understand it. But we have to wait until we get to the clause. So who's the subject? We don't know who the subject is until we get to here. And then here's the verb. So instead of having the noun followed by the verb as we have in a clause at the start of the sentence, the passive style has us reaching the verb first and then the noun. And this is kind of a backwards way of writing. Now it's not that it's wrong or bad, it's just that there are certain places where it works really well and places where it doesn't work so well. In academic writing, we want to go for active style. So we're going to put these back in the order that we prefer them in academic style. Alfred enjoyed doing the dishes most out of all his chores. Or we could use an introductory phrase in a comma here. And here's the clause. Alfred most enjoyed doing the dishes. But our clause, our subject and verb, we want to have at the start of the sentence so that the way the information is delivered to the reader gives them the most essential elements first. So let's have a look at some examples. We are going to convert some sentences from passive to active. Bob was eaten by a bear. Now, we might assume that this is the subject, but actually Bob doesn't really do anything here. The action is from the bear. The bear does the eating, right? So this style, passive style, can be a little more tricky to read for the reader than active. Active is usually the most clear and direct. So let's rewrite this. Who is doing the eating? The bear. And it's simple past tense, was eaten. Poor old Bob. So here we see that really, there's my subject, there's my verb, and Bob is just the object. He got gobbled up. Yum, yum, yum. Here's another example. The curry was seasoned by the master chef. So what's the subject of this sentence? Is it the curry? Well, it's easy to think so because we have a verb right after it, so it looks like a clause. But actually, who is doing the seasoning? The master chef. So the master chef seasoned the curry. And that is the simple difference between active versus passive. Now, of course, these are very simple examples, And sometimes they can become quite complicated and quite difficult to read. And if you're writing in an academic style, you always want to go for active because it's usually clearer. Here's a good example of a passive sentence that's a little clunky. Having more money than he could count was always a dream of Hugo's. So, whose dream? It's Hugo's. So here we have the subject, perhaps. In the previous example, the curry was seasoned. It turned out that the master chef was the subject and the curry was the object. So, could the same be true here? We've got an apostrophe here for possession. Dream of Hugo's. So, let's try this. Hugo's dream, there's the subject, was to have more money than he could count. And in Hugo's case, he could only count up to 24 by taking his shoes and socks off. So he really only dreamed of having $25. Hugo's dream was to have more money than he could count. Okay, let's have a look where the object is. Hugo's dream was to have more money than he could count. So this object is now here. Here we have the object first. So you see, when the sentence starts with an object, that's a passive style, and it can be a little confusing for the reader. It's not that it's incorrect, but if you want to be really clear and get information delivered in the most succinct way possible, you want to be aiming for active style. Let's have a look at another one. Getting to work on time was often difficult for Mabel. So who is having the difficulty here and who's doing the getting? Mabel. Mabel. Mabel often found it difficult. So there's my subject, there's my verb. So the clause now is at the start of the sentence. Falling down the stairs was the last thing Tina thought she would do. Tina thought falling down the stairs was the last thing she would do. So you see that? We take the subject, we've got a clause here. Tina thought falling down the stairs was the last thing she would do. So we're switching it back always to active. Now, one way to spot passive style in your own writing is if your sentence starts with a progressive tense verb. If your sentences are starting with progressive tense, I notice that when I'm working with student writers, whenever they start their sentences with a progressive tense, they are straight away going into passive style. And I encourage you to look at your own work and check your writing to see if you're starting sentences this way. Because if you are, you have inverted the sentence and you want to switch it round and put your subject at the start of the sentence. Okay, let's have a look at just a couple of others. The polar ice caps are being melted. Okay, what's doing the melting? Greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases are melting. So there's my subject. Oops. And there's my verb. So there's my clause at the start of the sentence. Greenhouse gases are melting the ice caps. Okay. 16 geese were herded by Peter towards the enclosure. Well, they were being herded by Peter, but what's the subject? Who is creating the action? Peter, right? Peter herded. So once again, we come back and see that clauses are important. Okay, there are more exercises in the workbook if you care to take a look. Okay, so that covers active versus passive. Now keep in mind that we're looking at fairly simplified examples, and you may be writing much more complicated sentences than these, but the basics still apply. In all of these videos we're looking at basic styles and simple examples, but they still apply no matter how complicated or how complex your writing becomes or how sophisticated your writing becomes. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. What shall I write about next? I might write a story about a phlebotomist.